Dear audience, welcome to Etteplan cybersecurity regulations update for the year 2025. My name is Antti Tolvanen and I will for the next half an hour be hosting this webinar, and I'm going to go through the latest news related to EU cybersecurity regulations. Today I will focus in on certain topics. We will go into looking at what's happened in the cybersecurity regulatory landscape. After that, I will talk about two very important issues. The first one is the need for people in general to develop their own regulatory literacy to understand what these regulations really mean. There's a lot of different information out there online about this, and now it's important that everybody learns how to also debate these topics. The second thing, which is the biggest disruption brought by the new regulations, is supply chain disruption, as today's software and hardware products will have a certain end of life coming to them via the Cyber Resilience Act and also via the other regulations. So we will discuss the impact of the supply chain disruption. After that, let's look at what EU will be doing now coming up when the topic of regulatory simplification is on the agenda. And I will also during the presentation discuss how Etteplan supports our customers in becoming companies with secure by design and default products and supporting processes. Today's webinar is also a continuation to many years of cybersecurity regulations webinars. In 2024, I spoke about the Cyber Resilience Act, and in 2023, I discussed the draft harmonized standards for the Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Acts D, E, and F. You can find these recordings, including today's webinar, on YouTube, and I hope you will enjoy the upcoming half an hour. So let's look at the roadmap, what has happened in EU. I will here discuss what kind of new regulations are affecting entities, meaning companies, and what kind of new requirements are affecting products, meaning software and hardware products, connected products, and the related service machinery, and so on. And I will start with cybersecurity. So I think there's not a company in EU who would have missed the concept of the NIS2 directive, where there's a wide number of new industries that are turned into critical sectors and other critical sectors, and on who the NIS2 directive's cybersecurity risk management measures related to the operational systems and the service provisioning systems that the companies use will apply. The news are such that at least in Finland, the national legislation started applying on April 8th, and basically NIS2 is now in full effect and force for companies that have their operations in Finland. What is very interesting about this, that in NIS2, of course, if you look at the Article 21, which contains the cybersecurity risk management measures, there was two handfuls of different requirements, and the Finnish cybersecurity law has in Article 9 about 12 different cybersecurity management measures. Now, however, when we look at the supervisory authorities guide that has been made by Traficom to different supervisory authorities under NIS2 on how they should monitor the compliance of different important and essential entities, we can see that the 12 requirements have expanded to almost 70 requirements, including certain requirement enhancements for more critical entities. And one of these very important things in Finland, at least, that because all companies that make electrical equipment, they are important entities under NIS2 as they manufacture electrical equipment, they need to have secure development lifecycle process also for the products. The thing is that today, when the security functionalities in digital for example, embedded devices and machinery, you need operational systems to enable the security functionalities. And I think this is one of the logics why, at least in Finland, also secure development lifecycle process are required from manufacturers of electrical equipment, even considering the products that they place on the market, even if that was not the original intent of NIS2. Then in addition, I want to bring up that all SaaS providers that are medium or large size companies and provide their SaaS services, meaning software as a service, most software companies today provide their products with the as-a-service business model, which means that they are under NIS2 digital service providers, and they are called cloud computing service providers because they provide an access to scalable cloud resources, and it's clearly defined in the legislations also that providing a SaaS means that you're a cloud computing service provider. What is very important that on October 17th, 2024, EU adopted the implementing regulation for NIS2 directive that applies on digital service providers. And this implementing regulation, it contains more than 100 mandatory information security management system requirements. And if a company does not want to fulfill a certain requirement, it has to justify why not to fulfill. And what is even more interesting is that the companies that provide are managed service providers, meaning that they install or maintain network and information systems either on-site or remotely to their customers' premises. These companies, meaning integrators, companies also like Etteplan, we are essential entities, and also these managed service providers need to fulfill the requirements of the NIS2 implementing regulation. I have discussed with the Finnish supervisory authorities Traficom about how this affects. So they say that the managed service provider definition does not apply if a company is installing and maintaining the products that they manufacture. But then they say that it appears to be if a company's business is to install and maintain third-party devices, networks, data, and software to their customers, then it looks like it is managed service provider. This is something that all integrators and software service companies should now keep in mind, that they might need to have these additional requirements in the information security management systems in order to be fully compliant. They also in Finland, they mentioned that if the volume of business is low or sporadic, not continuous, then perhaps a company would not need to register as a certain entity like managed service provider. But these are the things that I want to mention to manufacturers of devices and machinery. Get your information security management system in place, including your secure product development lifecycle process, and to SaaS providers and managed service providers, comply with the NIS2 implementing regulation. So this is a very big thing. All the companies in Finland should know about this. But the thing that is less known and is actually the cybersecurity regulation of products, and here we have, of course, in the background we have the Cyber Resilience Act that will fully start applying on December 11th, 27, which means that all products that are placed on EU market, meaning sold from the EU factory or importer to the distribution chain or the end user, they need to comply with the all applicable requirements of Cyber Resilience Act, and practically today's offerings do not comply with Cyber Resilience Act. There's things like support period and other requirements that I don't think any company today fulfills. So some might get by with just some bit of additional documentation. But this actually makes most of today's products obsolete in EU. Then, of course, Cyber Resilience Act does not apply on products that are under Maritime Directive, under road vehicles, certain categories of road vehicles. It does not apply on medical devices, in vitro diagnostic devices, and civil aviation devices, nor on national security and defense products that are solely used for that intended use. So that's why I have listed also these other categories. And all companies should also be aware that Cyber Resilience Act will force the companies to put reporting process in place for all of the products with digital elements, meaning all products and software products that have any kind of data interface that they have ever historically sold. And this obligation starts on September 11th, 26. So you have now, when you are probably an NIS2 entity and you have your information security management system in place, add to the incident reporting processes also the actively exploitable vulnerabilities and incident reporting related to your products that you have ever sold. If you hear about these things happening, that you report to national and EU's authorities, and in certain cases also to the users of the products and the supply chain. So Cyber Resilience Act is a really big thing, but then what has come to many companies as a surprise is the Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Acts 3DEF, protection of network, protection of privacy of the user, and protection from fraud. And this actually starts applying already August 1st this year. And companies are now heavily engaged in analyzing the gaps in the products and filling in the gaps, making the needed assessments of security mechanisms. And the problem with the conformance with the Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Acts 3DEF has been that it has not been that known that these requirements are being put into force and effect via Delegated Act. And the newspapers, media hasn't really written about this. So it has gone under the radar for many companies, especially smaller and medium-sized companies. And now at Etteplan, we're of course helping many of the companies in complying with the CRA and also Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Acts requirements. I would also say that none of the today's radio equipment that are under the red regulate are going to be under the Delegated Acts fulfill as such the requirements, because there needs to be formal assessment of the security functionalities, for example, a lot of additional documentation that needs to be done. So if you're a manufacturer of radio equipment or you distribute radio equipment, it's important that you take necessary action to make sure that you will have something to sell in EU. Then maybe the third big one that affects CE marking and the conformity of products is the machinery regulation. It starts applying fully in the beginning of 2027, and from a cybersecurity perspective, it's important to know that there's two new essential requirements, or improved essential requirements: the 119, which is protection of machinery from corruption, and 121, which is the safety and reliability of control systems. Both for the Radio Equipment Directive, Senelec developed the harmonized standards. There's also a really big number of harmonized standards being developed for the Cyber Resilience Act, and similarly also harmonized standards are being developed for the machinery regulation. Here's one of the ways what Senelec are trying is to have a way to use the ISA 62443-3-3 and -4-2 as a way to provide conformity for the protection of machinery from corruption. Then if we go backwards a little bit in time, we look at 2024, what has already happened. So you might be all aware that certain car models sales to EU was discontinued via the United Nations WP29 Regulation 155, which affected the cybersecurity of road vehicles. This has been in effect for all the cars that are type examined for the EU market starting last July in 24, and in the same month also the International Association of Classification Societies Unified Requirements, was it 26 and 27 or 27 and 28, started applying, and these make it mandatory for shipyards to supervise that all the computer-based systems that are being installed to ships conform with these new requirements. And the European Maritime Directive refers to these IACS unified requirements. So that's how these unified requirements are actually have a legal effect, and why these product categories are not under Cyber Resilience Act. So if you provide computer-based systems to ships, either you need to anchor mark them under the Maritime Directive, or then later on under the Cyber Resilience Act. Then you might see on the screen also the EU Cybersecurity Act certification schemes for the common criteria. So what is going on also is that in EU the national programs for common criteria certifications, they are soon no more, and the idea is that there's one joint certification scheme for common criteria like smart cards. And the idea is also that these certification schemes can be used to demonstrate conformity under the Cyber Resilience Act. Then, in order to enforce these legislations and also provide compensation to people who are are damaged by non-conforming products, even due to cybersecurity, so now In the product liability directive, which will start applying during 26, the defectiveness of a product is nowadays, if they don't conform with the cybersecurity requirements in the safety legislations, those that are meant to protect against the damage that has happened. And damage also now includes medically proven psychological harm, which is a new thing actually. Then one topic that I haven't mentioned is the general product safety regulation. So Cyber Resilience Act will put formally into force the general product safety regulation on such products on which no other EU product safety harmonization legislation applies, which means almost all software products that are distributed commercially in EU, and also some other products that are not under EMC or Radio Equipment Directive or any other directives. And one of the interesting requirements, if a company today distributes some software applications to consumers, they might not be aware that in EU under product safety, software has already been considered a product since 1988. And actually all software companies would need to have a risk assessment related to their safety risks in place. And I'm wondering how many companies, software companies, have actually made such a document. But there's a lot of changes that has happened. So EU has aimed to mitigate all the safety, security and fundamental rights risks that are caused by new technologies. And these regulations have not been that much in media. Cyber Resilience Act a little bit, NIS2 maybe, Radio Equipment Directive not at all, and not even the machinery regulation. But what has been in media is the Artificial Intelligence Act. This will start applying on fully in mid-August 27, and it's important for companies to understand now that there's requirements here for the providers of the AI system, meaning companies that manufacture the AI system, also in certain cases the deployers, the organizations that use AI systems. And there are certain AI systems that are prohibited in EU for fundamental rights reasons. Then there are certain systems that are called high risk. If this AI system, if it malfunctions, it could cause a health and safety risk to people and property. And at the same time, under other harmonization legislation, if it's mentioned that it could include a third-party conformity assessment, then it's a high-risk artificial intelligence system. Certain high-risk AI systems are also listed in AI Act, including, for example, safety components in critical infrastructure like energy and utilities and others. So what is important in AI Act to know that here's for non-conformity there are administrative fines in place which apply at least on the high-risk AI systems. AI Act also regulates a large general AI models that are then used by other companies as a basis, and on these also the administrative fines apply. And what even more important, they apply on the transparency provisions. So you might want to, if you are a manufacturer or user of artificial intelligence systems, in any way in your service, you might want to familiarize with the Artificial Intelligence Act. And there's also one clause that says that deployers should also provide AI literacy to the users of the systems, that there should be good trainings and instructions. But I would say that all companies should also familiarize with this, as companies are now aiming to automate their business process using AI, in addition to adding AI to the products. Then we have the use data sharing, the third one that impacts the life cycle of today's offerings. This is a legislation where EU aims at boosting database business, meaning there's a lot of connected products on the market and related services where the data is gathered, and now the user of connected products and related services get the right to get free of charge access to any use and environmental data that their connected products are generating, and transactional and event data from the related service. And what is more interesting, upcoming September, if you have a customer that wants to have free of charge access to the use data that maybe a product that you have manufactured and provided is generating at the customer, you need to provide this data free of charge if it's readily available and easily given. And then all the connected products and related services that are placed on EU market starting 11th of September 26 need to be by design such that this use data sharing is free of charge, easy, secure, and so on. And then the user can ask your company against a certain compensation to transfer that data to a data recipient. So lots of new regulations. Now, when I mentioned that the companies need to redesign their offerings, now is a really good time to take into consideration all of the new regulations and make products and service products that conform with the new requirements. And now, of course, comes the question, how much should we invest into cybersecurity regulations compliance? I was in a good training for medical devices about 10 years ago, and then the trainer told that this is a regulatory compliance is a many shades of gray, so to say. There's this area where you're non-compliant clearly, and then there's a area where you're balancing risk with the quality cost, and there's certain area where you're clearly compliant, and certain area where you are maybe over-investing into compliance. And now when it comes to cybersecurity regulations, I would encourage companies to stay in the white zone, because now I will explain the probability of getting caught for product security non-conformity is pretty high. You have seen that with GDPR that there's a lot of complaints made to the data protection supervisory authorities, and there's a lot of fines given, and these fines are high. And in a similar way for people, it will be quite easy to identify products that don't conform with the new cybersecurity or AI or data sharing regulations. And then through the administrative fines, the risk of I would say that the risk costs are high, so I would encourage all the companies to do their best to stay in the white area of conformity, not overplay it, but make sure that you meet all the requirements. And I would like to encourage this even because, okay, you might say that we do our best and we sell it on, but you have to understand that also your distributors and in certain cases the deployers will be facing the same administrative fines. So practically there will be a really low chance that a company with products that don't conform with the new cybersecurity regulations will be in the longer term be able to really market their non-conforming products. Of course, we can see here for radio equipment directive there's national fines which are not that big, but there's still the risk of recalls that come in. But when it comes to Data Act, Artificial Intelligence Act and Cyber Resilience Act, the non-conformity is highly de-incentivized via these administrative fines, and that the administrative fines also apply on the distribution chain, so all the wholesalers and all the parties until the end user. And then when it of course comes to the Artificial Intelligence Act, there's the transparency provisions and also the high-risk AI sections. If I remember correctly, they at least apply on the high-risk deployer. I don't remember did the transparency apply on the deployer also, but you want to be straight and in the compliant part on this. So this is what I want to tell, and then these are impact company products. Then of course administrative fines are also in effect in NIS2. So if you're one of the companies who need to conform with the basic NIS2 directive, the national implementations of the legislation, do your best to be conforming, because if there's a cybersecurity incident and you haven't really on paper, you cannot provide evidence that you conform with the law, then you're in breach, and especially if you're a digital services provider with the lots of additional requirements. I would encourage to fulfill these rules. So as the next topic, I want to bring up the roadmap, what the steps that companies typically face when they want to transform into providers or manufacturers of secure by design and default products and have the associated process in place to conform with the new regulations. Usually this this roadmap starts, but there's an idea in the company that, hey, product security would be nice. And then companies usually start building understanding about what's product cybersecurity, of the regulations. They start to familiarize with the different standards like IEC 62443, starting with the -4-2, which is technical security mechanism, going into the lifecycle process standard, the 4-1 after that, and so on. So they start hiring security specialists, and when time goes, they will start also understanding that these new regulations affect the placing of the market of products, and they understand that their products, digital services, their product platforms, and also their supply chains that go to the products and supply chains for their operational systems are becoming obsolete. Of course, they can use the systems that they have in place and the kind of components that they have in stock, but buying new licenses for getting new licenses to IT systems that you're using, if they don't conform, the supplier will be in breach of legislation. And then, of course, how to get components that don't fulfill Cyber Resilience Act to the EU market, or radio modules to EU market if the vendor cannot legally sell those. So that's a big step, and that usually leads to the situation where companies' management entity decides on a multi-year investment to developing secure by design products, software as a SaaS services, and putting information security management and quality management systems in place. Then the next step is actually to, after getting the multi-year project product budget granted, is to start getting things in order and really starting the transformation. From the automotive industry, because this transformation has already taken place over there, it's very important to, in the very beginning, identify which of your suppliers are planning to be in business in EU after 27 and so on, and identify those companies that are not aware of this, because you will have supply chain risk, and you want to mitigate this supply chain risk very early on, because you want to design your new products and services using such components that will be available in EU for purchase also in 28 and later. So important step is, of course, to add, then in addition to getting supply chain policies in order, is to implement a secure product or software development lifecycle into your quality management system. Yes, the software companies, you will need to have processes in place for the design, production, and vulnerability handling of your SaaS also. Then, of course, you need to design and produce and maintain your secure by design products. Then you also need to secure due to NIS2 your operational system, so you need to implement an information security management system. Usually the product development lifecycle is quality management system, and then the procedures for securing your operational and service provisioning systems are usually then information security management system. And then, of course, building security culture over the whole organization. The topic of product security and information security, there will be new roles in the organization that come up, and security will play a part in all the processes. Then you have developed the products and getting them launched. Now the important thing is that, are you able to develop competitive advantage? I would say that if you're on the market before your product competitors are, and if you're able to show much more, higher security posture, you must for sure have some ability to differentiate, because it reduces the pain points of your buyers, especially the IT and OT security organization, if they can, for example, buy products that have maybe third-party certifications or clearly very credible security posture. But the downside of all of this is, of course, that the lifecycle maintenance will require more effort, because you need to take care of following up on the vulnerabilities, and you need to provide software updates. And at Etteplan also we support customers in maintaining their software platforms to make, for example, embedded Linux products more quickly updatable, in order to keep them in mainstream and actually just update out all of the security vulnerabilities as quickly as we go. Then, the really big issue with all of this transformation roadmap is that the companies that have already done this on a voluntary basis before there was customer and regulatory requirements took from 3 to 5 years in doing this. And now all companies need to do this in less than 2.5 years. completely, and for radio equipment you only have a couple of months left for the EU market, and then of course automotive and maritime and such companies, the time has gone, but there's not that much time left, and the best solution for here is to really kick off the development efforts in a structured way, and use partners like Etteplan. We can support you in the whole way through this roadmap. I will later on in the presentation talk about building understanding about product cybersecurity regulations. I will talk about regulatory literacy. There I'm going to bring up the biggest issues, that the difficulty of understanding what placing on the market means. And then I will talk a little bit more in detail about the challenges related to supply chain when it comes to Radio Equipment Directive and Cyber Resilience Act. I mentioned that we at Etteplan, we support companies in this transformation. Is it then cybersecurity or AI or use data? So we support them in transforming into companies with conforming products, related operational systems, and also supporting management system. Is it the quality management system with the secure product development lifecycle, or the information security management system? And we usually start this by providing regulatory strategy and training to help companies management and other stakeholders to understand that these regulations are for real, and discussing the impacts of these regulations on various core business processes of the company, so that the impact of the regulations is really understood. And then we go in for the requirements, specifications, gap analysis of the offerings and the processes. We're also helping understanding what kind of risks reside in the supply chain. And then we would be really like to support you in developing the conforming products and operational systems, and also quality management systems. So you can contact Etteplan if there's anything where you need support in this transformation. We are ready to help you. So going into the topic of regulatory literacy, I think that the whole audience today, unless you're regulatory specialists, will require a little bit of introduction, that what are these regulations and what is this obsolescence about. So here on the slide I have an example of the new legislative framework. It's a set of European product safety legislations. The older ones are directives and the newer ones are regulations. The difference is that the regulations apply from the date of applicability in each member state without any separate national implementations, while the directives need national implementations. But basically all of this legislation, and also product safety legislations outside new legislative framework like road vehicles, for example, all have a similar kind of mostly a similar kind of table of contents. And I want to mention that many of these can apply on a certain product at the same time. For example, let's take a piece of machinery that has self-learning AI capabilities, and it has a data interface. So on that, the Machinery Regulation, AI Act, and Cyber Resilience Act might apply, and of course the EMC requirements and such. So many of these can apply at the same time. It's called Lex Specialis Derogat Legis Generalis. So the more specific requirements will prevail over less specific requirements. And in the newer regulations like Cyber Resilience Act and AI Act and such, the links to the older regulations and which apply and which do not apply, they are really well tracked. So this is the first thing to understand. Many legislation and many requirements can apply at the same time. And then I want to tell you how this, when you open a regulation, they have a certain table of contents. The first part is the preamble and whereas. And this here, the motivation behind the law is explained in the same order as the actual legal text in the body and annexes are explained. But the difference is that this preamble and whereas does not have absolutely any legal effect. In case there's discrepancy in the body and annexes, the actual legal text, and there's market surveillance actions, and the manufacturer makes a complaint to the Court of Justice in EU, then the Court of Justice in EU will look at the preamble and whereas and make a decision how a certain thing should be interpreted and not. So then I would recommend, when you familiarize with regulations, you start by reading scope and definitions, what is said about making available and putting into service, and the obligations of manufacturers. There you will understand a big number of the requirements that apply, and then take a look at the safety, performance, and maybe security requirements on the products, and what's said about the requirements for the development, manufacturing, and maybe vulnerability handling or post-market processes, and in understand when these start applying, look at the transitional provisions. But most of the regulations have a similar kind of table of contents, and it's good to, this is how to get started. Then in order to understand certain terminologies, for example, if you're a lawyer that comes from data law or privacy perspective, the European product safety legislation will bring to you many new concepts which you might not have been familiar with before. And there it's important that you download the EU Blue Guide from 22. This does not yet take into consideration this AI Act and additions to Cyber Resilience Act and additions to Radio Equipment Directive delegated acts. But they explain the scope, what's the scope of a product. They explain placing on the market, they explain making available, they explain putting into use, they explain misuse, substantial modification, which actually brings manufacturer obligations to a person that places this product then later on. They explain essential requirements, harmonized standards, conformity assessment procedures, and so on. So for you really to understand what these regulations mean, you need to understand the Blue Guide concepts. And of course everybody is waiting for more detailed guidance on Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Acts 33DEF, on AI Act, and also on Cyber Resilience Act. But until these are available, we need to, EU Blue Guide is what to rely on. So I hope that this part on the regulatory literacy will help you in navigating these regulations, because I think a very important part is to debate the regulations. Don't be afraid to contact me or contact somebody else and start a debate about these regulations, because you have to learn, and you can also contact supervisory authorities at some points also to validate your points. And if maybe you have a notified body, contact your notified body also related to the products, and use professional support also. But the important thing is to really understand what these regulations mean. So we're going to supply chain disruption, and now I want to bring up some important topics from the EU Blue Guide. The placing on the market. All of these regulations talk about placing on the market. Placing on the market is when a product or let's say a software license is provided from the EU manufacturer or who is provisioning that service license, either from the manufacturer in EU or the importer to a distributor or an end user. That's the date of placing on the market, and this product needs to fulfill all the applicable legislation that apply on the product, other than safety legislation, whatever other legislation, GDPR or eco design or taxonomy, whatever there could be, it needs to fulfill those. But it only needs to, if the legislations change on the next day, they don't anymore apply, those new requirements don't apply on this product because it has already been placed on the EU market. So that's very important, the date when this product has been placed on the EU market. Then because then it's made available for the first time in EU, and all the subsequent actions from the importer, manufacturer to distributor and end user, those are then additionally making available. These regulations say that these regulations also apply on the making available, such as Cyber Resilience Act, but remember they apply on the date of the place. It's according to the date of placing on the market when these requirements are calculated. Then it's the interesting part is this putting into service and use. It's when this product is then put into use. In this harmonization legislation, there's usually no requirements for the user of the product. The AI Act is the only difference, and maybe on the national machinery safety laws, there's also obligations for the user of the product in that case. But then we go into the supply chain distribution. Blue Guide says that within the terms of a specific Union Harmonization Act, components and sub-assemblies might be regarded as the finished product, and their intended use or end use might be the assembly or incorporation into a finished product. And now we come into the supply chain disruption. So it's important to understand that if you're a component manufacturer, the end use of a product is integration into another product. And then you need to, of course, if you think about radio equipment, you need to make the requirement specification, considering the intended use that it will be assembled in your customer's factory. And maybe the customer needs a certain access to your security assets and network assets and so on. But this is the important part. I want to bring this up because to date there hasn't really been any regulation on components in EU other than the restriction of hazardous substances. That's why all the component manufacturers have been filling in these EU declarations of conformity for restriction of hazardous substances. It's still a regulation that only applies on the finished electrical equipment. But the harmonized standard for RoHS states that the manufacturers need to, from their supply chain, require these kind of declarations of conformity. Now the big thing is that the Cyber Resilience Act brings in CE marking for all kinds of software components and also hardware components that have a data interface that are placed on EU market in a commercial setting. I will explain that later. There's a second view here on the product conformity lifecycle, which you maybe to illustrate also once more this placing on the market that it starts with EU placing regulatory requirements. They are obligations for the manufacturer and a subsequent supply chain, and also requirements on the products and processes. Then the manufacturer launches planning, design and development process and also production, vulnerability handling. All of these create technical documentation and build up the capability to have a serious production of a software and hardware product. Then the manufacturer engages into conformity assessment, does it based on internal control, or maybe involves a notified body if a type examination or quality system assessment is needed. And then when they have concluded the product meets the requirements, then they make the EU declaration of conformity and they can put the CE marking on the product. Now they have individual units of products or software products that are ready to be placed on the market, and then they can start selling. And I already explained the next phases, the placing on the market and making available and putting into service and use or installation. And then there's the phase when you provide services, you use them and maintain. So there also there's needed some vulnerability handling processes under CRA, and maybe you need to update your risk assessments, and for AI Act you need to have post-market surveillance. But maybe another picture if you need to explain at your company what is placing on the market. So this explains it. So we go to the supply chain disruption thing. So one thing that has caused a lot of confusion related to radio equipment is how this essential requirement 33D which applies on any radio equipment that can communicate itself over the internet, whether it communicates directly or via other equipment. I think the legislator has meant that this should apply on all kind of wirelessly all kinds of products that have a wireless sender or receiver, and regardless if they use then a wired connection for the connectivity to internet. But then there's this word itself, and when this delegated act was published, I could see notified bodies that were claiming that, hey, if a gateway that makes protocol conversion in between is needed for this product to connect to the internet, then this doesn't apply. 1 year later, they had changed the guidance that it applies regardless if it's a gateway or router. So in the Finnish language, this word itself is not in the Finnish text. In the Swedish text, it says independently. All the legislations are at par, and it's up to the legal manufacturer of the radio equipment in their radio risk assessment to consider and justify, does this 33D apply on the product or not. But there's really not that much definition. But I want to say that then we think about supply chain disruption. I haven't heard about that many radio module providers if there are modules that are soldered to a PCB or modules that are permanently attached into the radio module. That I have heard of one that is discontinuing their product due to this 33D. Then from the other vendors of radio modules, I have heard that it's up to the manufacturer to conform with 33D, and it's a I would say interesting topic. Let's see how are there any other radio module manufacturers that will be discontinuing their radio modules, these that are soldered. When it comes to radio modules that are plug and play, host products where you can attach a radio module, if this radio module is easily accessible and removable, it doesn't make the host product a radio module. This is according to a Red CA guidance. So you might also want to think that is your product maybe a host product where this radio module is easy to remove. So you might be able to avoid the definition of the whole system as a radio module. Then you have for the conformity, you need to rely on that the radio module that is easily removable conforms with RED 33D. But interesting topics. There's a bit of gray area here, and to understand how, if RED 33D applies on your radio equipment, you need to dig a lot into older guidances and EMC directive, and Etteplan can really help. We have a really good compliance consultant team on radio equipment directive over here. Then the second one which I want to bring up, if with RED 33D there's a chance that certain radio modules will no longer be distributed in EU. Cyber Resilience Act will actually be the most disrupting legislation of all of these, because CE marking will be needed for the placing of market for any hardware and software product that has a data interface. And if you think, according to, if you look at the definition of a product with digital elements, it doesn't really limit the scope of a product with digital elements. So it could be really big machinery, a really big piece of process that the manufacturer supplies to its customer. It can also go down to, a little really small component like an analog to digital converter that has a data interface, or a small commercial library that is used as a part of a digital solution. And if you think about all of these need to be CE marked for Cyber Resilience Act. And there's 2.5 years of time. So I would say that there's a pretty big supply chain risks out there, and you might want to look at which of your suppliers will be in business after 27. And there's of course mitigations. We have all faced from hardware perspective the component crisis caused by COVID and the big fluctuations in demand. So for hardware products, this is an easy way forward. Ask your suppliers, will their products become CE marked for first the Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Acts and then for Cyber Resilience Act. Make last time buys, check if this supplier has some kind of warehousing in EU, so they have already placed the products in the market. But when it comes to software components and software products and licenses to SaaS, it's a little bit more difficult. Of course, you need to ask your suppliers that will they have conform with CRA in the longer run. But how do you make last time buys for user licenses to say Microsoft Office, for example? Where do you place those, and or to your CRM system or to your MES system that you have already purchased? Because the system that you're using you can still use, but then this is interesting because this selling a license according to the Blue Guide appears to be that is a placing on the market. So do you need to stockpile licenses to your system? I don't really know how that will go. I hope that in Cyber Resilience Act, the legislators will address and provide a guidance on how this end-of-life warehousing for software licenses for an IT system that you have bought will be handled. But that's a question to discuss. Then, of course, related to NIS2, you might want to ask your SaaS provider, do they conform with NIS2 implementing regulation? So that is, Etteplan would be happy to support also in these supply chain issues to help solve those, because then we understand the extent of redesign. We can start planning the architectures for your new secure by design products and operational systems based on this information. So as we can see, there's a lot of new regulations that are starting to be into effect, and people have talked about the regulatory tsunami, and I think the legislators are also a bit of fed up. On the side of this, there's of course this taxonomy and eco-design requirements, and transitioning away from fossil fuels in automotive and road vehicles. So it's a rather big topic. So what is now happened here? So I spotted this internal market emergency and resilience act last autumn, when the Radio Equipment Directive Delegated Acts harmonized standards were not yet harmonized. They were published but not yet harmonized. I was wondering how will EU address this situation. So they now have a legislation where they can put in effect an emergency situation where products can be placed on EU market without notified body involvement or even without following harmonized standards. There's now a mechanism for that. Earlier that was not possible. Then now in the new rolling working program they talk about regulatory simplification and such, but I looked through the working program. There's really nothing that impacts the product safety legislation. So I don't think there's going to be easing up. The big political thought is of course for these big AI models and how to promote innovation in that area. I don't know if there will be some simplification for those couple of 5 different requirements in the AI Act. Let's see how it goes. But then on the other side of the ocean, we have, of course, a little interesting geopolitical situation that the U.S. executive administration has placed is having this new customs policy, and one of the justification for this customs is this unfair trade practices that the U.S.-based companies face all over the world, and US has brought up that the European harmonization legislation with the requirements, harmonized standards and notified bodies is discriminatory for US-based companies. And now there's of course this discussion about these tariffs, and it will be interesting to see now when EU Commission find Apple and Meta on the Digital Markets Act, and there has been some comments from the White House that they don't like this. Let's see if how this discussion proceeds. Do we in EU still have the independence to ourselves define our legislations or not? But let's see how this thing proceeds. It will be interesting to see if there will be further comments. But simplification seems to be the direction. Still protecting our security, safety and fundamental rights. So I want to wrap up by recapping how Etteplan supports our customers in compliance with the new regulations. I want to tell a bit about the Etteplan. So we're a technology services provider, and we have 3 main business areas. We have the software and embedded solutions where we do embedded devices and different kind of digital services and products to support our customers. Many of these products will of course become under Sierra products with digital elements, and their development and maintenance is already today regulated by NIS2. Then we have our engineering solutions that provides machinery development and production process to our customers. So we have, in addition to embedded device and software, we also understand machineries and very well. And then our technical communication data solutions are specialized on managing technical product data and making their development and maintenance much more efficient, and utilizing all the technical information about the product that now is of course required by the new regulations also to support the after-sales services. So we can help you in many different ways in these new disruptions. We have prepared by becoming ISO 27001 certified in our software sites and many of our technical documentation and data solution sites, and we have also implemented a secure product development lifecycle according to IEC 6243-4-1 in order to also support our customers in developing products that are compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act. I already earlier mentioned this roadmap, how we support, starting by training in regulations and understanding their impact on the company's operations, and then going into requirement specifications, gap analysis. We have many projects ongoing where we help our customers kick off and execute this transformation, looking at the issues in the supply chain and planning and implementing new secure by design products and operational systems, and also getting the quality management systems with SPDF process and information security management systems in place. So if you have any needs or requirements in these areas, please don't hesitate to contact me or somebody else from Etteplan. We actually had a poll in the beginning of the webinar, and of the hundreds of attendees, there was about 2/3 that had started to take some steps towards being a provider with secure by design products and process, but there was still 1/3 of the participants companies hadn't started doing anything. So Etteplan is here and ready to help you in what you need. So I would like to wrap up by just ending here with a summary of security and these new and other services related to these new regulations, how we're supporting you. And I hope that we can cooperate one day in the future in developing new products and also new processes. And I would like to thank you for your time to follow up on this webinar, and I hope to be in contact with you later. And all the best for the 25.